Hi, I'm Matt Betz with Ore Creek Fleet Consulting. You know Booker, and this is Chris Morrissey with ABA Technologies, and you're on the road with Booker and Betz. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been with ABA Technologies for a little over 5 years now, and started looking at how do we expand our business lines. Originally, we were an educational service provider working closely with a university, and when I came into the company, I was asked to expand out into different worlds, into different sectors. And I started to work on that plan, and over the course of the next few years, we were successful working with several industries. And I'd say about 18 months ago, right about the time I took over as CEO and president of ABA Technologies, I started working with Matt on looking at how do we work with the fleet market.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's been great working with you guys. This is a unique conversation for Booker and Betz because I typically haven't interviewed anybody that we're working with professionally.
Yeah.
So this is unique, but I can tell you it's been a pleasure working with your team. And the one thing that everybody talks about that, when we're talking about behavioral safety, is they can't get over that there are 10 PhD behavioral scientists working on behavior-based safety at ABA along with the other education stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's definitely a unique environment, and thanks, Matt. I do appreciate working with you as well. I think it's been quite an introduction to the fleet world, and nobody better to lead us through it than you. So I appreciate everything you're doing. But yeah, it is definitely a unique workplace, and considering our size and the number of PhDs that we have working with behavioral science and looking at behavioral-based safety and other components as well. I am not a PhD. I have my MBA, which sounds good, except when you start to compare it against all the PhDs in the organization. But it's a great place to learn. It's a great place to work.
Yeah.
So I'm lucky to be where I am.
Well, and thanks for being here for the interview today. This is On the Road with Booker and Betz, and so we tend to break down these conversations a couple of sections. The first is the high road. And that's typically something that you're either working on or recently finished, but something that you're proud of that you can share with the audience.
Yeah, I would say that it is this introduction into the fleet world, bringing the behavioral-based safety, which is an area that's been used in manufacturing. It's been used in driving as well. A lot of individual driver behavior, seat belts, and so forth. But it hasn't really been introduced into the fleet world. So as we're stepping in, and we're hearing so much in the fleet space around the overall need for a solution such as this, that over the years there's been so much that's been put into how do we improve our driver safety, how do we make sure that we have on-time delivery, how do we reduce risk, and there's been a lot of money and a lot of time spent in trying to solve that problem. And we think that we have a unique solution that we can bring in, because what we're looking at, we're not just looking at the individual drivers and their individual behaviors, but we're looking at the entire culture. And we're trying to see, okay, well, what is it we can bring? And not only at the individual driver level, but also at the leadership level. Because really the behavior is driven by the expectations that are set by management, expectation by companies, all the way up through shareholders, right? Everybody has expectations for what they want to do, and that trickles all the way down. And so if you can put a Band-Aid on something, let's say at the driver level, really that's all you're doing is you're affecting one individual and their behaviors. And what we're looking at doing is taking a look at across the entire culture and how do we solve problems before they even happen. And that to me, that's exciting, right? That we can take a look and see, okay, where can we have this effect? And not only that, because we're using behavior analysis, it is a science based on data. And so everything is data driven, which means we take our data points, we're measuring, we're consistently looking at, well, what is this? We're not forming a hypothesis up front and trying to prove or disprove that. We're saying, well, what is it we want to see? And we'll make adjustments as we need to in order to get to that space.
Yes, I've been very impressed by the approach, and in fact, confirming what you just said in talking to a lot of fleets so far, one of the things we noticed is they've got a bunch of what they consider safety data and behavior data, really,
Sure.
through telematics. But they still can't figure out why the drivers are still acting unsafe
Right.
and behaving unsafe. And I think that checking the entire ecosystem up through upper management, and also training companies how to coach their drivers more effectively, is what I've been impressed with at ABA. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the supervisor coaching training that we're looking at.
And I think this can apply to really any industry when you talk about, well, coaching and what is it we're looking for. Oftentimes when we start talking about coaching, a lot of times, and I see this all the way, I coach Little League and I see this all the way through Little League, a lot of times we're punishing, right? We're saying you're doing something wrong and stop that. Now the trick to that is that that's really only effective when you catch that behavior happening in that moment, okay? And so if you, going back to driving, if you see somebody exceeding the speed limit and you're sitting next to them and you say, hey, you're going too fast, slow it down. Do that. The next time you're not in the car, they're speeding, that's not there. What we want to do is encourage the right behavior, right? And so from a coaching perspective, I'll take it back to baseball. We want to encourage how to swing. And so instead of saying, don't drop your elbow, you're going in and you're giving them the right technique, right? Keep the elbow up. We're cueing them to do the right thing, so that way we see the behavior that we want. From a driving perspective, we want to make sure that there is reinforcement at the end of when they're having that good behavior, because that's what's going to really stick with them, right? So, when we say reinforcement, it doesn't always have to be a monetary incentive or a monetary reward. Oftentimes that it could be praise from a manager or recognition. Those are very, very powerful ways to be able to reinforce good behavior.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said that, because we hear a lot about behavior-based training for drivers or whatever, but it's not really the same thing as what ABA is doing. It's more, trying to do it through data, and it's always in the past, sometime in the past,
Right.
where rewarding that good behavior or having an effective conversation, for a supervisor to have an effective conversation with the driver, is much more powerful. I agree.
Without a doubt, right? And I think having the data is a very good reference point. But as you said, it's something that's happened in the past. And we see this quite a lot with businesses. A lot of time businesses will they'll take a look at their financial statements and what just came out, and here's what we're doing. And having all that data, all the historical data is great, but it's a snapshot in time of what you're looking at. Not only that, it's such a large amount of information, and trying to understand what to do with it makes it extraordinarily difficult, and it doesn't tell you, well, what's going to happen necessarily. Now, you may be able to draw some conclusions based on that, but adding the behavioral component, which is what we're bringing into the equation, to be able to, identify from the data, well, what is it we're looking at, and then being able to plan for the future, being able to be proactive, I think is something that's going to be really helpful.
Well, we wish you all the luck, and I'll do what I can to help bring it to the fleet audience as well. I think it's something that's needed, and a lot of people in fleet safety agree. So that's the high road, but not everything goes all the time as we want it to.
Yeah.
So we also sometimes travel down the low road. So what can you tell us about a time that maybe things didn't go perfectly, but that you were able to learn a lesson from the experience?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And an example from earlier in my career, I was a project manager for a commodities company, and one of my jobs was to travel to all of our manufacturing facilities. We had almost 40 throughout the United States and Canada. And at one of the facilities, we were having an issue. Essentially, we were loading oil into train cars, and those train cars were then going out the port to be shipped overseas. Now, when they were being loaded to weight, to spec, and then by the time they got to the port, they were way underweight. And now when the cars were loaded, the tabs were being put on, so there was no tamper. There was nothing really going on, and this was more than possible evaporation or leakage, and it was so consistent that it couldn't just be from something natural, let's say. And but it wasn't every single car. And so we made some assumptions going into that, right? That there was somebody that wasn't doing their job, somebody was being lazy, really not really understanding the situation. But we made some assumptions, and fortunately there weren't any jobs put at risk at this point because we had made some assumptions, but we didn't know. So I went up to visit the facility, and I watched them load the rail cars, and everything looked great. They tagged them, weight was there, spec, everything was perfect. And I did this for a number of days. Everything was perfect. So I couldn't really figure out what was going on. Until I decided one day, I'm gonna go check second shift. Now, to put a little context into this, this is up in northern Saskatchewan, and this is wintertime. And so when you're going during the daytime, it's cold, but it's sunny, and things are fine. At nighttime, totally different story. It is cold, it is dark. The facility that they're loaning out of isn't heated. And so what was happening was these guys were running into their booth, and they were sitting there, and they had this little space heater. They really weren't warming up. And then they would run out to the rail car, and they would just load it really quick, and they jam the hose in, and then they pull it out, and they tag it up, and it would go, right? And they would say it would be to spec. Well, they weren't. They weren't loading to spec. But the assumption was that the employees weren't doing a good job. But we weren't taking the environmental conditions into account, right? We weren't putting people in a place to succeed, and that's really what I take from this. And I know it sounds, somewhat basic. You put a hose into a rail car, you load it up, and you're done, right? A lot of electrical components that go into it. But really, what we weren't doing was setting up our employees to succeed, and that's really what I took from that. Is that it's not just on the employee to succeed. It's also when an employee fails, it's not solely the employee that fails. This is really a failure all the way up through management, all the way up through leadership level, that we need to set up our people to succeed, and we need to celebrate those successes. And we also need to make sure that people aren't going to fail. And that's really what I took from that piece of it is that all we were doing was putting people that really wanted to do a good job in a position to fail. And we made the assumption that they didn't want to do a good job. So I took quite a bit from that experience.
And I'll tell you, there's probably 1,000 similar stories that I've heard on the fleet side as well.
Yeah.
We can all take a lesson from that. Well, the last road we travel is the road less traveled. And that's where we talk about you and maybe something. I know a lot of people in fleet don't know you, but if they met you, they might have heard the conversation that we just had. But what's something that people professionally or personally might not know about you until they get to know you a little better?
Yeah, I mean, I would say professionally, I actually started off as a computer programmer in Y2K. So my first job was basically trying to replace 2-digit dates with 1-digit place in computer programs. And I did that for a number of months, probably, but then I expanded on. But I stayed as a developer for a number of years. What I really liked about it was the problem solving. And I started to carry that into, well, I just don't want to sit in front of a computer and have that just interaction with the computer all day. Although it was rewarding because I was able to solve problems, I did like the human interaction as well. So I expanded into business analysis, which then went into project management, and that helped me grow. And all along the way, I picked up new skills. I've been through several industries throughout my career so far. But no, I did. I started off as a COBOL programmer back in Y2K.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, it's been great talking to you. Thanks for joining Booker and I on our journey. We appreciate
Matt, really appreciate it.
Giving us.
Really nice, Booker. Nice to meet you, bud. Yeah, you're a good boy. Good.